Welcome to Surthrival, the podcast about befriending grief. I'm your host, Stacia Gaines. Today I want to introduce a new series called Caregiver-Surthrival. This is not really my primary story. My husband did not die of a terminal illness. He had not, have not cared for anybody for a long term in the home. But I kept having people ask me, when are you going to do an episode on Caregiver-Surthrival? And so I started thinking about it. And even though that's not my primary story, there are a lot of people who know a lot about that. And I know many of you are facing this. It's kind of funny. I knew so little about it that I actually called it at first caretaking. And then when I got the word caregiver, I'm like, that's immensely different. So I had to have a shift in thinking. My story, which I always like to start with, is my dad, about a year and a half ago, was non-diagnosed frontal lobe dementia. And he fell, and my brother could not get him up, so he took his last trip away from our house with an ambulance. When he got to the ER, there was really not a lot wrong with him except for COVID. But my mom and brother and I all agreed that we could no longer care for him at home. It was just too much. He could not come home again. And that was terrifying. I still remember I felt clueless, lost, scared. Where does he go? How do we pay for it? And then I remembered my friend Chris Blackerby. And I called Chris, who's here with us today. And Dad ended up being in 3 different hospitals, in a rehab facility 3 different times, and ultimately died in the rehab facility after being on hospice for 3 hours. And I had never put together all the 3s that were associated with this. I never cared for him at home, so I didn't think I had much to offer listeners. And then God has a funny sense of humor. Last week, my mom was in the hospital for 5 days. She's 90 years old, and even though the hospital staff was doing all the heavy lifting with her care, I was exhausted just from sitting in the hospital with her. And so I thought, well, thank you, Lord, for giving me this fresh perspective on caregiving. And again, I wasn't even doing the heavy lifting. So this series is focused on caregivers serving their loved ones with a terminal illness. But I recognize that we are all terminal. From the moment we're born, we are starting to die. I know that sounds kind of depressing, but it's true. My mom has not been diagnosed with a terminal illness, thank goodness. But at 90, she needs a lot of care. So I think the scope of this is actually broader than I originally thought. Since this podcast is about grief, we'll try to focus mainly on that. But I do believe that there are a lot of practical things that people need to know to help them in their grief. Thank you for listening to Surthrival, the podcast about befriending grief. My hope is that something you've learned today has piqued your interest, and you can take a baby step in your own healing journey. I would love to hear from you. To send me a message or even tell me your story, go to surthrivalpodcast.com. If you'd like to book me as a speaker, you can also do that through the Contact Me section of my website. Please follow me and tell your friends.